Welcome back to Practical Church Planting. On our previous episode, we gave you part 1 of 8 things that I've learned from preaching every week. Here is part 2.
Welcome back to Practical Church Planting, where in 15 minutes or less, we'll give you practical tips, advice, and encouragement to help you plant and grow healthy churches. My name is Brian Androsian. Joining me today is Dylan Dodson, and today is round 2.
Round 2.
Today we're talking about part 2 of 8 things that we, and by we, I mean Dylan, has learned from preaching every week.
All right, so here we go. 15 minutes or less. We had to split it up. Hopefully part 1 was good. If this is your first time listening, listen to the previous episode.
That's right.
So here we go. Number 1 of part 2. We'll do 4 more. Really has to go with the last thing, a little bit that we said last episode. And basically, we said that humor was important. Mm-hmm. And part of that is people laughing. It breaks down barriers and things like that. Now, one thing I've experienced, and even if you've only preached like a handful of times, you've probably experienced this as well. And that's this, that people laugh and connect with things that you often don't expect.
Right.
Now, this used to throw me off a lot more when I hadn't preached as much. I think now I can tell more when something's going to be funny or when something's not going to be funny, but it still happens. Or, you might think of something in the moment and you don't think it's going to be very funny or whatever, but it goes with what you're saying, so you say it. And what I used to do is I used to be like, oh my gosh, people are laughing, and because I didn't expect it, I would just keep talking.
Yeah. And
one of the things, especially when it comes to when people laugh, is that you have to let people laugh. Like, you have to let them breathe. You have to let them kind of get back focused in on what's going on. And what happens is if you talk over them, they feel like they can't interact with you.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I learned was like, hey, when that happens, it's okay to pause and just sit for a second, because especially if the fewer times that you've preached, you feel like 2 seconds takes 10 seconds, and really it doesn't. And so that's a big thing I would say, is that even in the unexpected moments, even if it throws you off, if you're not as experienced, it's okay, let it happen before you keep talking.
Yeah, that's the first time I preached, and that was the feedback I got from your wife, actually. And it's something I never thought of. She said, when you say something that's funny, give us a second. Because what I was doing is I would say something that was sort of funny, and people would laugh, but I would just steamroll it and just run right over it. And then they don't have a chance to laugh, and then they're missing what you're saying. And I thought the same thing. I mean, it's awkward to take a pause, especially if it's an unplanned pause.
Yep.
But when she said that, I remember thinking that's something that never even dawned on me.
Right.
But it makes it so much better and easier once you actually plan to do that.
And so again, these are the unexpected moments, so you can't necessarily plan for them.
Right.
But you can plan for, this might happen at any point, and when it does, I have to be ready to just pause for a second.
Yeah.
Because that'll be good for you and for everybody else. And so again, that's number 1 for part 2, is that people laugh and connect with things you don't often expect. And so you don't expect it to happen, but do expect to give it a minute if that actually does happen.
Right.
Number 2, and this is probably one of the biggest things, especially for people that are newer to preaching, and that is that less information is more. Again, we kind of get in the thought process of, and we've said this in previous episodes, of like everything we learn that people need to know it all.
Yep.
And if you share too much information, especially if it's a boring and dry message and there's not very many stories or personal connection points or anything like that, people will stop listening. Mm-hmm. And I and all of us would rather people learn a few things and take away a few things or one thing than nothing. And what happens is, understandably, we're studying a text and we're excited about it and we're like, oh, I didn't know this. And so we try to throw it all in there. And while it's good to know, it's not all relevant.
Yeah.
So let me give you an example real quick. Let's say you're on a passage and there's some debate about what the interpretation of a verse or something. While that's great and all for you to study all those things, like, people don't care. Yeah. And so what you could say is, hey, there's a little bit of debate about what this means, but here's kind of what most people say, or here's what I think. Instead, and not actually say every single different variation of what it could be. Now, there are times where that might be helpful, like if there's something that's a well-known passage or something that people are confused about. But even then, maybe share 1 or 2 of the most popular ones. But again, I think it's sufficient to say, hey, there's some debate, we're not quite sure, but here's probably what it means. Or if you do share 1 or 2 or 3 differing opinions, oftentimes what I have found is that the point of the text overall is still the same.
Yeah.
Even if there's a passage or 2, a verse or 2, a word or 2 in question. And so I would just say this: less is more, which is really hard when you're first starting because you think everybody needs to know and wants to know everything, but that's not true.
Yeah, and the tough thing is you want to share things that you're excited about. So if you're researching and find something you're excited about, you want to share it, and sort of rightfully so. If you don't share anything you're excited about, you're going to have a boring message.
Right.
So it's hard to, it can be, I guess, hard to kind of walk that line of sharing things that you're excited about, but not giving too much information.
Right.
But you're right. At the end of the day, you're preaching, not giving a history lesson.
Yep.
And so the less information, the less of the background information is important, but the less background information you can overload people with,
right,
the better.
And he would think too, like, what do you want want people to walk away with the message like, what are you trying to get people to know? And even if you're excited about a lot of this background content or what this word means in Greek or whatever, like how much of that is actually relevant to the point you're trying to make, and how much of it is just fun to know?
Yeah.
Because again, you're the one preaching, and so you are more excited about this than 99% of the people in the room. Like they're thinking, what does this have to do with me and my life? Of course, giving context and all that sort of thing helps them apply it to their life better, because we understand how the original readers and hearers heard and saw it and learned it. But again, don't teach everything that you read and that you learn, because it's just not relevant. And I know it's hard. I actually did it this week, which is actually kind of funny. I cut part of my message down because I thought it was going to be too long, and then ended up being a few minutes short. But to me, that is worth the trade-off of going too long and being a little bit boring and throwing too much information. Because oftentimes what we want to cut out is not the stories or illustrations. The stuff we want to cut out is the stories or illustrations. We say that doesn't matter. It's the knowledge and the information they need to know. And really, it's kind of flipped.
And really, this is the responsibility of preaching in general, is to take complicated and kind of these big ideas and distill them down for everyday people.
Right. And so again, less information is more. I know you might be excited about it, but you don't have to tell everyone everything that you learned, because they don't care. And I think sometimes people do this because they want to sound smart or feel like they have it all. And so if you're a fan of John Crist, the comedian, check your heart and don't do that.
Ooh.
Less is more. Number 3, you have more time than you think you do. Now, this is a little ironic maybe, because we talked about in previous episodes how shorter is better, particularly if you're less experienced. But with that, I would say that you have more time than you think you do. So I think sometimes, we talk really fast, or we feel like we have to cut out a lot of stuff, because what happens is especially when you go through your sermon, your message out loud, which we highly recommend, especially if you haven't preached as much, or you don't have a ton of experience, you're out loud by yourself is often, at least in my experience when I first started, was at least 25% longer than it was when I actually gave it.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times you talk slower because you're not nervous. You're still thinking like, does this work well? You might like re-say a sentence again because you didn't like it, which you're not going to do when you're on stage in front of people. And so I would say you have more time than you think you do, so you don't have to rush. You don't have to fly through things.
Okay, so I have a question, and I can't think of. There might not be like a real answer to this question, but I'm thinking to someone watching this who maybe is very inexperienced, only preached maybe a couple times, and they're trying to walk that line of, okay, I have more time than I think I have, so I want to kind of prepare extra content,
right?
But I also want less to be more, but I also don't want to just have extra content,
right?
So I don't even know if there's an answer to this, but how do you kind of walk that line of not just putting in a bunch of fluff to make sure you don't accidentally preach a 12-minute message,
right?
But have it still be
engaging.
So
let's say you're speaking somewhere and you've got 25 minutes. I would personally, if I was super inexperienced, I would give myself 33 to 35 minutes timed by myself speaking.
Okay.
Now, when I give it, because I'm going to lose 25% of it, that's my experience. Now, what happens is you might lose it, but then you might babble or ramble on other things. So you can't do that. You have to stick with what you said, knowing that it's not going to be as long as you think that it should. So talking out loud is really important. And I would also say this, if you have too much stuff, which again, this is what happened to me this past Sunday, take out the information, not the stories. Now, if let's say it's 30 minutes or whatever, and you only have like one story, I would say that's not enough.
Yeah.
And so you're like, well, I should only go 30 minutes, but I've got 40 minutes of material and I know it's going to take me 40 minutes. What should I cut? You should cut information, not your stories, or you should add more stories and cut even more information, because people are bored, they'll disconnect. Yeah. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does.
But just know that, again, you can pause. Again, on stage feels like a long time, but to people listening, it doesn't feel like anything. Go through your message over, before you give it, especially if you're inexperienced, and just know, hey, if I'm supposed to speak for 15 minutes at something, I should probably plan for 20 or 25, and then I'll be cut short.
Right.
And the other reason why it's important to talk out loud is because what happens often is you don't really prepare, and you say, I think I've got enough time, and then you realize you don't, and so the end of your message, you just ramble to fill time, which you don't want to do. You want to actually prepare and over-prepare so that you know exactly what you're going to say.
Right.
You have more time than you think you do. And then number 4, lastly of this second part, so actually number 8, if you will,
there you go,
is that if it looks easy, it's because it's not. And this is for pretty much a lot of things in life. If you look at an athlete or a musician or an actor or somebody that does something really good, whatever that, even if it's some random niche thing, if they're really good at it, it's because it's not. And oftentimes, we see them and then we want to go try and learn how to do it. And then we realize, oh, I'm so bad at this.
Yeah.
And I think what happens sometimes is we look at preachers that we admire and we just assume, oh, they just kind of woke up and they're just good. They don't even try. I know a guy, an older guy now, who's a phenomenal pianist. Perfect pitch. I mean, just like he was a prodigy when he was a kid. Just like absolutely amazing. And he says that one thing that's frustrating to him is that when people say, "Oh, you just have so much talent," and while it is true, he has more talent than the average person. Like if most people worked as hard as he did at playing the piano, they wouldn't be as good as he was. But even with that, very few people worked nearly as hard as he did at playing the piano.
Yeah.
So it's not just that he was good, because there's a lot of people that are good at a lot of things and they never realize their potential because they don't work at it. It's because he worked at it a ton. So if he worked on the gift that he had, and together with hard work, he became really, really great.
Yeah.
And regardless of what your skill or talent, your talent or your gifting level is, I think, again, we just assume, oh, they were good, they don't have to work hard at it. When I would bet that they spend a lot of time doing what they're doing. Yes, they may be good, but they spend a lot of time on it. And so I would not assume that it's just gifting that makes people good. It's a lot of hard work.
Yeah, I've heard a similar quote, and I think it was Jack White of the White Stripes. I may be totally accrediting it to the wrong person. But I remember hearing this quote that he was saying that people always say, "Man, I wish I was as good at guitar as you are." And he basically said, "No, you don't. Because if you did, then you do what I did. I didn't wake up like this. I spent years and years doing this. So if you actually wanted to be as good as I am, you'd spend the time doing it."
Yep.
I remember the first time that I preached, we had this kind of, it was myself and another guys on staff here. Dylan had us preach to like a community group, but in our auditorium. So you kind of get the feel of what it was like. And I remember preparing it thinking, not that it's going to be easy because I've never done it before, but I've grown up in church my whole life. I feel like I know certain pastors' voices really well. I feel like it's not going to be that that difficult. And it was just preparing it before even giving it. I realized like when I was halfway through, this is a monster to do for the first time. And then giving it was a whole different thing, and it went way different than I thought it would.
Right.
And you're right. It's the kind of thing where you see it done so much, it seems like it's no big deal, but it is.
And I laugh because I remember in college, thinking I want to do this ministry church planning thing, and sometimes hearing people and being like, I could do better than that. Right. And then you actually, I'm like, oh no,
I can't.
I can't. At least not where I am now. And so if it looks easy, it's because it's not. It takes a lot of hard work. And I love what you said too about the guitar player, whoever it was.
Yeah.
Is I think sometimes too, when it comes to being a better communicator, we say things like this: I'm not a good storyteller. I can't preach with fewer notes than I preach right now. I can't use humor. I'm not funny. I can't use any humor. And we say things, well, I can't. That's why you can't. Mm-hmm. You may not be the funniest person or the best storyteller or the most engaging person, but you can get better than what you are. Yeah. And when you say things like I can't or I'm not, well, then you never will be any better than you are right now.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's a good point. If it looks easy, it's because it's not. And so again, this is part 2 of 8 things I've learned from preaching every week. Today we talked about people laugh and connect with things we often don't expect. So pause and allow room for that when it happens. Mm-hmm. Less information is more. Don't tell everybody everything you've learned. You have more time than you think that you do. So pause and slow down. It's going to be okay, but do not fill that time up with rambling at the end. And number 4, if it looks easy, it's because it's not. And speaking about getting better at preaching, we have something here at Practical Church Planting. If you're listening to the podcast or watch the video version, you know this because we said it even last episode.
That's right.
We have a free preaching course on our YouTube channel. Go to Practical Church Planting, search it on YouTube. It's, 7 or 8 parts, and it's all about practically how you can be a better communicator, and it's free. Now, there's a lot of ones you could pay for, and I would just recommend, invest in your preaching some way. You're not going to get better just by preaching. You've got to do some things, and so that's a free resource for you if you're interested.
Absolutely.
So thanks for being with us today, and we'll be with you next time on Practical Church Planting. Thanks so much for watching this episode of Practical Church Planting. Whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube or Practical Planting, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, make sure you like or subscribe or do whatever it's telling you to do or should do on that platform.
And hey, if you are so tired of looking at our ugly faces, but you're not tired of listening to our beautiful voices, then you can find our podcast if you just search Practical Church Planting on iTunes or Google Play. Make sure not to just find it, not just to listen, but to subscribe.
Make sure you subscribe. Brian, tell them to subscribe.
Subscribe.
See you next time.